Much, gentlemen. That was a super interesting discussion, especially on the changing face of development in Africa. If you have developed literally anything in Africa, it is not for the faint-hearted. That being said, Ram, we are very excited for Mama Shelter just up the road to officially launch. I would now like to indulge in a fireside chat with Securing Your Investment. Michelle Farrell, Senior Operations Officer, Climate Business, Buildings IFC, will moderate this discussion. Please, can you make your way to the stage?
Great, thank you so much for having me. And please, can I have our two speakers as well on our panel come up? We have Naz from the Global Center on Adaptation and Julian from Bureau Veritas for this session. So for today, just starting this off, moderating it from the side of IFC, I think many of you know of the work that we've done for many years in sustainable buildings and infrastructure investment. Perhaps many of the people on the panel before have been our investees or people that we have worked with in the past. Now, what we're seeing today is a change to the need for resilience as well. It's adaptation and sustainability that we need to focus on. So we wanted to bring this discussion as a panel today because we wanted to understand how do we drive the private sector to actually invest in resilience. It's a little bit more challenging to calculate the ROI on these things, and how do we drive the private sector to do this? So for the first question, I want to ask both of our panelists, what do you see on the ground in the space of resilience?
Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be in Cape Town. Thanks to IFC for this invitation. I'm Naz Beykan, Senior Program Officer with Global Center on Adaptation. So I'd like to take you a bit of an adaptation finance journey, right? So when we look at the global climate finance trends, in a year, according to 2022 data, we know that like 1.3 trillion US dollars was invested in climate finance. But only 5 to 7% of it went to adaptation. And from that 5 to 7%, only 20% flew into Africa. And that was around 14 billion US dollars. But Africa's annual adaptation finance need is 4 times that. So, and with the climate crisis intensifying impacts on the continent, and I don't probably need to tell any of you in the room on how that's being manifested across the continent, that the need is expanding, and also we have a widening gap of adaptation finance. And in that adaptation finance, which will be important for those of you from the building sector, property sector here, less than 1% of that financing went into a building sector. But cities, our built environment in Africa generates around 60% of the GDP of the continent. How do we, that's where the resilience challenge lies. And our observations from the field is that there is a diverse set of actors, which are represented through you in the room, with sometimes misaligned and diverse incentives for resilience. Resilience is a much harder sell than green because we can't directly translate it to cost savings like sustainability. Few observations. So policy usually lags behind climate science. So the regulations can't keep up with what's happening on the ground. Financial institutions, and I think Julian, you will also touch into that a little bit, is sometimes don't have the right products, the tools, or the knowledge to make climate risk-informed decisions for investments. when we look at insurers, we've seen even in developed countries like the US, like insurers pulling out of high-risk climate areas in the world. Like now we're stranding assets and leaving the economic burden of climate risks on households and consumers. I'm sure the developers in the room would be asking like, okay, I do want to make my buildings, the buildings I'm developing resilient, but I don't know where to start from. I don't know how to access the data, where to access the data, how to understand the data, and where do I find the financing to do a building resilient? And then the consumers, as you would know better than I do, are very price sensitive. They don't want to spend one more extra dime on additional features. Aesthetics sometimes override the resilience or even sustainability features at times. And if we're talking, and these are all like new buildings we're talking about almost, and if you're talking about retrofits, then we're talking about multiple households with ownerships, and then like good luck getting a consensus between people. So it's really a challenge of misalignment in the cacophony of these stakeholders. It's making it very challenging in the built environment to integrate resilience, but curious with Julian.
Yes, thank you. Thank you first, Michelle, for the invitation. I'll just speak a little bit about BV before starting on the topic. So Bureau Veritas, we're a French company, global company in testing, inspection, and certification. 85,000 people globally and 8,000 people in Africa, so very local. We understand the local practices and the specificities of the market. We usually play the role to support investors, developers to better understand their risk with a really technical hat here and how you can invest or develop in a safe environment with an asset that will be resilient, performant, and safe and sustainable for the purpose you are doing it. So just a bit of feedback on what we see on the ground. And first I'd like to speak, before resilience, just about the application and the quality of the asset we find overall on the continent. We are French companies, so we know very well the Francophone side, which is a bit more regulated in terms of insurance. I don't know if you are familiar with the decennial guarantee, which you have to apply on assets that you develop in most of the Francophone Africa. So that's giving a first layer of quality or insurance of the quality of the assets that are developed. While maybe the English speaking is a bit more open in terms of regulation, and then you have developers, and it's mostly where the financial sector and developers are also printing the quality they want in the asset. But when it comes to resilience, we see on the ground that we have now new requirements. So mostly from investor side, with new, firstly, a financial and non-financial report where you have to put in place your strategy in terms of resilience. So that's part now of your reporting. We also see that in some of the deals that are sometimes financed by the IFC, where now MIGA is asking as a requirement to have a resilience plan within your feasibility study to develop. So this is now a reality, not necessarily now embedded in the projection of the profitability of the operation you're doing, but also it's starting now from a regulation point of view, more and more, and also requirements from the investors. When it comes to insurers, now obviously the primes, you see that there is an impact on the primes when it comes to insurance on your operations, and that's also something that you have to start early in order to anticipate those risks, financial and operational at the later stage.
Great. So to talk a little bit about what IFC is doing in this area, many of you may be familiar with EDGE. It's a green building certification that is used throughout Africa. And what EDGE has been able to do is really help developers not only demonstrate that their building is performing well, but that it's demonstrating excellence, that it's demonstrating alignment with global best practices. And there was a recent study that came out by the World Bank called Building Green that looked at the enforcement gap between policy and actually what we see on the ground. And unfortunately, even if we get the codes to where they need to be, that doesn't necessarily mean we're at the finish line. So IFC has developed a tool, and I invite you all to look at this. It's called Building Resilience Index, and it's resilienceindex.com. And this allows you to not only demonstrate that your building is complying and meeting the local regulations and has mitigated risk, but it also allows you to demonstrate excellence. So in the way that we've seen green buildings be able to attract great grade A spaces, the top tenants that you can get, perhaps getting better rental rates, we wanted to give the private sector a tool that could do the same thing, right? So you could say, not only has my building mitigated the minimum risks, but my building is really safe, or my data center is in a place that is secure. And we have done things to address it, not just in line with the code today, but in line with global best practice. So in that case, we are also able to overcome the gap, right? Because when you're chasing an incentive, you don't have a gap because enforcement isn't something you can kind of escape. So what solutions do you see from both of your sides, both from the Global Center of Adaptation and then also from Bureau Veritas, of how your companies are dealing with this challenge?
Yeah, so maybe a little introduction to Global Center on Adaptation as well. We're an international organization based in the Netherlands and dual headquartered in Nairobi as well. That focuses on closing the adaptation gaps through accelerated action on adaptation. So in that realm, I'm going to give two examples how we're like engaging with the building environment. One of them is through our engagement with IMF. So IMF has this program called Resilience and Sustainability Facility, through which it establishes climate finance roundtables with ministries to identify policy reforms before they can support certain governments. So government has to tag certain policy reforms to access IMF support. And for that, we're helping to integrate the adaptation lens into these policy reforms so that the policies climate-proof the countries. And so that's one thing. And we've done in, for example, Senegal, where there was a revision of the building code where we provided comments with the climate risks that are coming up in the country to ensure that the code is future-looking. The other work we'll be doing with the BRI program of IFC is a World Bank project called Africa, it's a very long name, Africa Green Resilient Including Housing De-risking Facility, short grid, and it's aims to mobilize private sector financing in Africa, across a few countries for housing sector specifically, and we're collaborating with the World Bank and IFC, providing technical assistance on future climate risks and market gaps on certain technologies and construction practices where the financial institutions on the ground can do targeted investments to climate-proof the countries they're operating in. So those are the two things we're doing, and we're realizing with also our engagement with IMF is like private sector mobilization is the cornerstone for closing the adaptation gap in Africa.
Yeah, so back to on BV side, we have joined recently, and we have a partnership now with IFC regarding the BRI, Building Resilience Index, as global verifier. So again, I think on the BRI, it's extremely powerful tool, again, and well defined in extension to EDGE. Looking at EDGE was not enough to cover the resilience aspect. So it's very complementary. And again, it's a simplification on a complex, very complex environment with a lot of variables into a very simple tool. So again, I think you have managed to simplify this situation into that tool. And it's extremely well done. Here, it's not a certification; it's a verification. So you have a grade on your asset. It's taking into consideration the local building code, but it wants to go above it. So it gives transparency for non-technical environment and stakeholders regarding insurers, investors, so you know where you are investing or you are putting your money in. And here, BV, we so again with our global coverage, independency here, we also provide this part of verifying and getting the trusted, let's say, results that you are looking for into this evaluation. So here we are starting some projects. I mean, we have some some pilots that we are looking at in Mozambique, also looking at some opportunities in Central Africa, where you have a lot of floodings exposure. Senegal also, we had some requests, Rwanda, and now also in South Africa. So this is something that I think it will become very quickly live. It's already live, but more and more replicated. And I think we were saying yesterday that it will be embedded within the overall Edge by 2027 as one single tool. So this is getting into the track to be real very soon. So this is mostly how we come in that environment, on the mostly in the emerging countries environment. With BRI, it's extremely powerful. We also work in Southeast Asia on this tool, and South America as well. So that's for me.
Great. And I think what I'm hearing from both of you is we have to do two things, right? We have to start on the policies and the codes and get those embedded into the regulatory environment, and also ensure that the enforcement is there. But immediately we can start by taking advantage of companies that do the validation on site, do that verification like Bureau Veritas, to get those global best practices validated and trustworthy. So we can immediately start that adaptation work, having those adapted buildings to the new climate challenges while also working on the code. So it's really a double process, the same that we did with the green buildings, where we're able to immediately start. We know that these green buildings can qualify for green finance. We were speaking about a green bond. A bank can use the certification from a green building system like Edge to issue a bond. Now, the same thing we will be doing with BRI. So BRI can provide that validation, verification that it has been adapted properly, making the building eligible for adaptation finance. So we kind of have these two pots of money, and then we're able to put it in using a trusted source where we have that validation. So now just to ask you guys for a final word. Maybe we'll start with Julian and then go to Naz.
So regarding building resilience, indeed, Mo, it's a pressing need. It's not even a need now, it's a must. And again, BRI tool is something that's very pragmatic, that we see it soon embedded as in the sustainable box with the green building, but the resilience as part of it. And ultimately, I mean, our codes, back just to my initial comments, our codes sometimes are here, are not construction codes, here, not necessarily implemented fully. And we expect that those tools like Edge and BRI are opening the way to then cascade in those codes and then to be the new norm. So and maybe we'll have another risk to address in the future, but this is so in the next 10 years we see BRI inside the code, and hopefully your work will be done with this. There will be surely a new one.
I mean, besides looking forward for our collaboration with IFC, we also recognize that resilience in the building sector to close the adaptation finance gap has untapped potential. Resilience has to become business as usual for private sector, especially in the building sector, because we need to protect the economic growth and sustainable growth development of Africa, I believe. Otherwise, we'll risk losing parts of the GDP of the continent. So as GCA, we believe like the solutions are like sitting in the room, and we'll be like very curious to have conversations over these 2 days with you of what you're doing. Please feel free to approach us. Like, let's see how we can collaborate together to make sure that resilience becomes business as usual for all of us.
Great, thank you so much, and please be in touch with us. I know Bureau Veritas has a booth out there that you can come speak to us at, and we will be around over the next few days, and we can show you more about it. Thank you for your time.